Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Difficult Conversations. I'm your host, Welda Black. Today, I have four phenomenal women who are going to talk about what shall I tell my children. And I'm going to start by introducing our first panelist, who is Miss Sophie Miruka. Miss Miruka is a mother of three. She is an educator, a nurse, and she is the founder and CEO of Sustain Hope. Miss Sophie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Wilda.
All right. Next, I'm going to invite Miss Rona Sibanda. She's also a mother, a grandmother. She is the president of ZAWAC, which is a Texas chapter, and she's also a community leader. Welcome, Miss Sibanda, to the show.
Good afternoon, Wilda. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, I am privileged to have you in the show. Thank you for agreeing to be here today. Next, I'll invite Miss Lydia Tate. She's also a mother. She is an entrepreneur, a financial consultant. And finally, last but not least, she is VP in banking. Welcome, Miss Tate, to the show.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us here.
Thank you for coming. Last but not least, I have Dr. Francisca Ramoni. She is also a mother. She is an author of the book Immigrant Woman, and she is also a certified family life educator. Welcome, Miss Dr. Francisca Ramoni, to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies, for coming in today. Today, we are going to talk about what shall I tell my children. And the reason I came up with this topic was I was inspired by the poem, What Shall I Tell My Children Who Are Black? And this poem was written by Dr. Margaret Burroughs. And she is showing the pain that she feels as a Black woman, already experiencing inequality. It is clear that she is experiencing her experience is so strong that she cannot bear to have her children also to experience the same. So after we listen to this poem, I will hand it over to our moderator, Miss Bianca. Miss Bianca, welcome to the show. And then we'll go straight to the discussion. Enjoy the show. So let's get the poem to come up. All right, I think there's technical difficulties. We will go on with the questions, and then we will play it after the first question.
Hi, everybody. Hello, ladies, and welcome. Um, in the current climate we're in, and everybody knows we're discussing social justice, and in the current climate we're in, I know we're moms and we have children of different ages, so I'm very excited to hear what your viewpoints are on this subject. So we'll just dive right in. Our first question is today, first topic we're going to tackle is, have any of you experienced personally having to tend to a child being insulted? Or has your child come to you personally being upset about something someone has said to them in school, in daycare, at church, anywhere, something they heard about racism? And as a mother, how did you react when your child came to you with the racism issue? And any of you can take it away.
Are we?
And I'm glad to be in this panel this evening. And what I'll say about racism, as a leader in my organization, even before being a mother, we experience a lot of these cases coming up. And so as a leader and as a mother, how would you be able to address racism in any situation, on every environment? So for me, what I always think about is, at what context did that come about? What were you guys discussing before that issue of racism came about? Because it's very important and critical to know what environment it came about. Were you guys joking? Were you playing? Were you referring to some animations, or what was it about? And if it's in organizations as a leader, once I have the context, then I'll be able to know how to address it. If it is a joke and both of you are joking, then we'll address it as a joke and leave it at that. But if it was not a joke, then we go to the next level of addressing racism in organizations. But as a mother with a child, I'd like just to tell the child that, we don't call people by the color of their skin, but people are called by name. And so not let anybody call you and make you feel less than because they have called you black or because they've called you the color of your skin, and just be contented with who you are. Whatever they are calling you, that's not what God made you to be. You are a God's creation. You are the best God created. And therefore, people will say stuff, but that does not mean it is what you are.
Great. I like that. And you said about context, and I'll come back to the context question, because you said sometimes someone may be joking or sometimes it may be serious, but I think sometimes the lines are really blurred.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to that question. So Miss Sibanda, in your travels, and I know Miss Sibanda, for those of you who don't know, she also preaches as well. How do you deal with this situation? Because you're also a preacher as well. You do preach.
And says they are upset. It might not be just racism. It could be some bullying of some sort, or anything that was said to them that upset them, and they come and tell you as a parent. I'll say this as a grandmother, because I am taking care of my grandchildren right now. And 3 years ago, they came from Africa. In order for me to avoid reaction, I had to prepare them. When they came to this country, I sat down with them. I said, you are going to school. This is the kind of school. This is a different environment. This is what you might experience, A, B, C, D. And then I prepared them. If someone says this to you, this is how you should react, or you should know that it's not your fault. What you are is not your fault. Your accent is not your fault. You grew up in Africa, so you have an African accent. Your color is not your fault. You were born as you are. So this is what we expect. So when I did that before they even went enrolled in school, I was preparing them so that to avoid for me to be reacting all the time.
And for you, of course, your children were a little more grown when they came here, and I call it, I term it a double whammy when you're an African immigrant parent, because you're dealing, number one, with the African situation, being an African immigrant, and then you're dealing with being Black. So I personally term it as a double whammy. Now, I have two parents here who have raised kids from very little, so I'm born here. Miss Lydia Tate and Miss Miruka, and any of you can take this, because now you're dealing with two cultural clashes. How do you raise your children? And I know, Miss Miruka, your children are younger, but Miss Tate, now you have grown children. So any of you ladies can take this portion away.
Well, thank you, Bianca. I've listened to my fellow mothers, and what they are saying is very true. For me, of course, as the question is asking, yes, I've had to deal with those episodes where I'm like, what? What happened to my baby? The anchor is to instill the values of, the self-validation. So I've had to also get to teach them that when they get out of their households, as they step into those classes, they are already disadvantaged. It is just a disadvantage, but it's not anything that has anything to do with who they are. So we talk about these issues, and for me, I take it as a responsibility as a mother. I know there are mothers who don't have to worry when their kids are coming from school, they just welcome them home. But for me, I have it at heart that I have to assess the demeanor, because sometimes they might not be able to tell you what happened at school. So I intentionally purposed in my heart to know my children very well, that I can be able to look at them and say something is not right, and then be able to inquire and establish if there's a problem. So when my kids are coming home, I am assessing them. Like the little one time walks home and is limping. And I'm like, okay, why are you limping? When he left home, he wasn't limping. Okay, then he tells me a child, tripped him and he fell. It is my expectation that if this happened in the presence of a teacher, they should have been able to notify me that this actually happened at school. It shouldn't get home and then I start inquiring of what happened. So at that point, I get to ask, I get to establish, and as one of my parents already said, I follow up with the school. I have to follow to the bitter end, establish the truth. When the baby fell, were they playing? Was it a joke? Was it on intent to harm my child? And I've come to realize that when they realize that you're on top of your child's issues at school, they will listen. They will listen, and we have to be involved. What I'm simply saying is we have to be involved. We have to understand the mannerisms of our children such that you are able to establish. That is for the little one. For the grown ones that we have this conversation, I have my child in college. We have like we're conversing right now. So he will tell me what happened, and but I will still insist on training them of who they are. There is no need to be apologetic of who God created you to be. Everybody is beautifully and wonderfully formed. Stay on course. Echo that as a mother, because I know that echo in the back of his mind is okay. So him, we can communicate. But for the little one, I have to keep an eye on him. I have to look at his mannerisms, follow up with the school and all that. That's how I've dealt with it.
Okay. What I'm hearing from you is that as a parent, you really need to be alert and always be focused and listen to your child and see what kind of changes and also have a lot of open, candid conversations. So Miss Lydia Tate, let's have you answer this question as a mom of all 3 grown children.
So
who you raised since they were little. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think in my case, my kids are adults now, and I'm thinking about some of the challenges that they had growing up. And in my case, I was a single parent raising these kids that are now adults, and there were many times when we had to deal with different things along the way. I can tell you that sometimes I had to show up at the school and let my voice be heard. But many times, I remember my daughter coming home one time when she was in middle school and she was crying, and I called her into my bedroom and we started speaking. And I think at that time she was just getting to know herself. And these kids at school had called her names, and there were names that were based on her skin color. And it bothered me. To be honest with you, it hurt me because, when something is happening to my child, it affects me personally. And so it really bothered me. And so, of course, the first thing I had to do, which, my daughter says that up to today, is, Mommy, you always talk about praying. But the first thing I had to do is just compose myself and pray with her, because I didn't know what else to do. Because, like you say, we're immigrants in this country. Some of the issues that we're dealing with when it comes to race are not things that we grew up with. So we learn by trial and error how to respond to some of these things, especially with our children, because one day they go through one experience, the next day they go through a different experience, and we learn and we grow. So, I had to talk to her to remind her of who she is. That for one, she is God's daughter and there's nobody else like her. She's created in the image of God and nobody can change that. And that she's beautiful. God did not make a mistake for creating her the way she is. And it wasn't just that she was called black, it was an insulting term for her skin tone. And that is something that she cannot change. She did not ask to be born with that type of skin tone. And so she learned to just know who she is. So today, even when she's experiencing that at work, now she's able to deal with that better. My boys were a little different. My oldest son, during those moments when he would experience discrimination, he learned how to be a jokester. So he would joke about a lot of those things that they were calling him. So he became a sort of superstar in school, and that helped him. So he learned how to cope. And I think the coping came from us having conversations at home and reminding him of who he really is. That he's a child of God first. He's the best that there ever has been. And even when that didn't work for them, they found ways to deal with it. But now in the adult age, it's a different story, and we can get back to that later.
Okay, great. So basically, for you, religion seems to have played a very
Of
important role
course,
and
yes.
given them a strong backbone. And of course, he found a way. Some children are very self-reliant. They do have coping mechanisms. So it's great that your son did that. So of course, our next topic will be talking about skin tone, and you brought it up. And we're going to touch on that in the next segment, just after we listen to the poem by Dr. Margaret T. Burroughs. And the title of the poem is What Shall I Tell My Children Who Are Black? So let's listen to this real quick.
Children who are black.
Okay.
And the subtitle is Reflections of an African American Mother.
Absolutely.
This one was written in 1963
Mm-hmm.
on occasion of the 100th anniversary of the emancipation of our people, 1863, 1963.
100 years.
What shall I tell my children who are black of what it means to be a captive in this dark skin? What shall I tell my dear ones, fruit of my womb, of how beautiful they are when everywhere they turn, they are faced with abhorrence of everything that is black. Villains are black with black hearts. A black cow gives no milk. A black hen lays no eggs. Bad news comes bordered in black. Black is evil, they say, and evil is black, and devil's food is black. All that is bad is black.
Mm-hmm.
What shall I tell my dear ones who've been raised in a white world? A place where white is made to represent all that is good and pure and fine and decent, where clouds are white and dolls and heaven. Heaven surely is a white, white place filled with angels robed in white, and cotton candy and ice cream and milk and rubber dresses and dream houses and long, sleek Cadillacs. And angels' food is white. All that is good is white. What can I say, therefore, when my black child comes home to me in tears because a playmate identical to himself has called him black, big lip, flat nose, and nappy headed? What will he think when I dry his tears and whisper, yes, that is true, but you are no less beautiful and dear? How shall I lift up his head and get him to square his shoulders, to look his adversaries in the eye, confident in the knowledge of his worth, serene under his sable skin and proud of his own beauty? What can I do to give him the strength that he may come through life's adversities as a whole human being, unwarped and human in a world that is full of biased laws and inhuman practices? That he might survive, and survive he must. For who knows? Perhaps this black child of mine here bears the genius to discover the cure for cancer, or the brilliance to chart the course for the exploration of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So he must survive for the good of all humanity. He must and will survive. I have drunk deeply of late from the fountain of my black culture. I have sat at the knee of and learned from Mother Africa. I have discovered the truth of my heritage, the truth so often omitted, and I find I have much to say to all of my black children. I will lift up their heads in proud blackness and tell them the story of their fathers and their fathers' fathers. And I shall take them into a way back time of kings and queens who ruled the Nile, who raised the pyramids, who measure the stars, who discover the laws of music and mathematics. I will tell them of a black people, our black people, upon whose backs have been built the wealth of 3 continents, Europe, Africa, and America. And I will tell them this and more. Knowledge of his heritage shall be his weapon and his armor. It will make him strong enough to win any battle he may face. And since this story is so often obscured and omitted, I must sacrifice to find it for my children, even as I sacrifice to feed, clothe, and shelter them. This I will do for them. If I love them, nobody else will do it for me. I must find the truth of heritage for myself and pass it on to them. And in years to come, I believe, because I have armed them with the truth, my children and their children's children will venerate me, for it is the truth that will make us free.
Question out here, actually.
An amazing poem that
Wow.
encapsulates everything that we are talking about today. That one poem, we could technically just end the show, because that entire poem just encapsulated everything that we are talking about. Now, we are raising a child in what we term a white world. Everything is white. We grew up everything being white. To be honestly frank, growing up even in church is the white Jesus, white everything. So how do you now deal with a child's self-esteem when someone walks up to them and says, you're really dark, your skin is almost navy blue, and other kids have been told, let me see, I'm not sure whether your blood is the same color as mine because your skin is different. How do you address these issues when it comes to personal self-esteem in regards to, we're talking now about the outside features? We'll start with Miss Tate, because you did touch on this subject in the last. So we'll begin with you.
I mean, truth be told, it's offensive even for any human being to even still think like that. But the reality of it all is that it's out here. We have a lot of people who are not informed, people who maybe have not had the experience to read about how the society really exists, and they're missing out on what diversity has to offer, because the more different we are, the better. I always think about Joseph's coat of many colors, and how when his father was very fond of him, and his father made this coat of so many colors and gave it to him as a gift. And I think about humanity and how we are created in so many colors, because it's God loves all of us. And so why would anybody think that one color is better than another? It perplexes me, to tell you the truth. But when that happens in my household, I remind my children of what my father taught me. My father taught me that, I had 2 things that he gave me that I have always focused on giving my children. First of all, the knowledge of God, the knowledge of God and education. And those are 2 things that I know that nobody can ever take away from my children. So I focused on those, and the knowledge of God would mean self-knowledge and self-awareness as well. So when they come home and somebody is calling them these names, of course, like I said earlier, my first call is always to refer to what the Bible says about who they are. What the Bible says, if you're a Christian, if you're a believer, what the scripture says you are is what is true. Everything else is false. And anything that is not aligned with the scripture is from the enemy. So why would you listen to what the devil says? So that is what I have taught my children over the years. And I thank God that my oldest son, who's now 27, can speak from that perspective. He's a very confident young man. Yes, we do go through some challenges here and there, but he chooses to walk with that confidence. But unfortunately, especially what is happening today in the society today for my adult children, they feel it, they experience it, they're walking in it. So when I talk to my son now about, the racism that is going on, his concerns are very different from the way that he would have responded when he was young. And I know that later on we'll talk about that, so I don't want to get into that. But I think it all goes back to the knowledge of self and believing what God says about you. forget what anybody and everybody else tells you you are.
Yeah. So, Dr. Ramoni, how do you deal with this in your personal life as a professional and with other parents as well? With those, you have three dynamics working for you.
So for me, I will not take the side of the gospel because the religion part is covered for me. The three ladies there really cover that for me. I'll go to the educator perspective and a professional perspective. So for me, as a professional, this is how I address it with my child or with children as an educator. If somebody calls you a name, are you that? You are not. That is what they think, the perception about you. But you yourself, what do you call yourself? What do you think you are? And so I go into the affirmation mode. You just go ahead and affirm them and tell them they are the best that can be. You know, you're perfect there you are. You are, you know, you are intelligent, you are brilliant, you can do this thing, and let them not, you know, tell you otherwise. And so I go with being honest. Be honest with the kids. Yes, they're black. That's true. You cannot take away from that. But then for them being black, tell them what it comes with that. Nobody chooses to be black. That is how you were born. And so don't take offense if somebody tells you you're black. You know, it's when people call you a black, you feel like it's an offensive word. But again, we go back to the context. What was it what you're told? Embrace the situation, embrace, so that you tell them, they become curious. You talk about history, you talk about why people call us what we are based on our history, historical background, what we do. The difference is not negative. The differences make us who we are and make us stronger. So there's a positive out of it. You talk about people being, you foster them to be energetic, you foster them to be strong in whatever they do. And more importantly, as a parent, as a leader, you lead by example. Do you call people names? Because kids will go by what you do. Do you call, if a neighbor pass by and say, oh, that whatever name, or when you go to the store, look at this S person. So at the bottom line is affirm your children, lead by example, be honest with them, tell them that that's the world you are living on, and this is how you can take care of you or for yourself. There are books out there parents can read. I have a book I read here. It's called Beyond the Golden Rule, Parents' Guide to Preventing and Responding to Prejudice. It's by Dana Williams, illustrated by Vincent Wen. It talks about how you can be able to talk with your children at early age about prejudice and racism. And that's what I can say about it. Just affirm your children, be with them, be there with them. When they bring the issue, talk it out. Let them understand that, yes, I know they're calling you this, but I'm here with you, baby, and this is how we're gonna handle it.
Okay. And I would like to, Ms. Sibanda is back with us again. Miss Rona Sibanda and Miss Meruka, in your own personal lives, in your homes, as well as I know you're Miss Meruka, you're a teacher as well from home, and you also teach here. In your teaching, as well as teaching in church school, in Sabbath school, which is during church school, do you encounter children coming to tell you about this problem of being called dark skin, and how do you deal with that? And then they come and tell you, oh, people are being unfair to me, life is unfair, and because I'm from Africa and I'm black, and this is happening to me, nothing seems to be fair. How do you handle those conversations with the children?
Really, like everybody is saying, is going down to their level and being a good listener. Mm-hmm. And then in your response, the information you are giving them should have content that is resonating with them, reaffirming them, like my speaker there has already identified. I was gonna mention about Nelson Mandela, rightfully said, nobody is born hating, nobody is born loving. Mm-hmm. We learn these things, they are taught. So And there is nothing really you are going to do if you give yourself the assignment of trying to change or fit into somebody's explanation of who they are, then you're giving yourself a huge burden. Even in the Erikson psychosocial development from infancy to adulthood, the very first phase of development is the trust versus mistrust. And so, as parents who are speaking here probably have raised our children, but it is very important that new parents realize that that is a very important phase of life where the children are, learning the trust and the mistrust. However successful they come out of that phase of life, then if they're successful in, creating the basic virtues of being competent and confident, then it helps them however they develop into the next phase of life. So it is dependent on how we have the personalities that we have, how we have anchored them, how we have developed from childhood. Because somebody who is hateful, if you are raising your child in a hateful environment, that person learns hate, and that is why they are comfortable to call people names. But if you raised your child in an environment where they developed trust, they acquired these basic virtues that now will help them, look forward to, the next phase with confidence. This is where the difference comes from. So the virtues that they have acquired versus were they positive or negative? They impacted them. They impact each other. So counseling, depending on who is coming to you seeking, because it's different. Girls are very delicate at different phases of life. They're adolescents and they're dealing with this. How you deal with it is different, So it will really depend on what are you addressing. And so have the substance and the content that is appropriate to the situation at hand. But if it's haters, teach your children on how to deal with haters. We are not going to eliminate haters from this world. They will be there. So to be on the same side is to teach and equip our children, just like my panelists here have indicated. Teach them, equip them on how to deal with the haters, because they're going to be there at every phase of life. That's what I would put in there.
Great. And I'm hearing you to equip. Equip is a very important word.
Yes.
How fully are we fully and intentionally equipping our children to battle racism? And one way we can fully equip them, obviously, is by teaching them their history and heritage. Are we doing enough? Do you think that African homes, as African immigrants and being Black living here now abroad, do you think that African families as a whole, and it may not be even your family, you can speak from your personal experience or in the community, what you've seen as a whole, are we fully equipping these children to be proud of their heritage by knowing their history, knowing their heritage, in order for them to essentially be well versed in their history when they're coming face to face with racism? And anyone can take it away now. It's pretty much open.
Well, let me quickly throw that in there, because we are having difficult conversations here. And if we are going to be bold and call it by the name, we are not doing the right thing. I have come across families who are ashamed of where they come from. They don't want to identify themselves from where they're coming from. And therefore, they don't even teach their children their culture, their tradition, because they feel it's backwardness. It is, you are not fashionable. you know, to be speaking your language, or even, you know, be expressive of where you come from. And that is a huge hindrance. One thing that is constant with no controversy is your story. Your story is valid. Whoever you are, your story is valid. If I'm telling my children that I walked to school, from home I was walking barefoot 4 times a day to school, I am saying it proudly. It is my story. Even if I told them today, tomorrow, 10 years to come, it remains the same thing. It has no controversy. So the biggest thing that we need to own and be proud of is your story. It's the only thing that has no controversy. Let your children know where you come from. Let your children know your history. There is nothing wrong, because some of them say, oh, I suffered this way. I don't want my children to suffer, or, you know, do the things that go through the things that I went through. And now we over pamper our children, and that is becoming a detriment. Values, tradition can be passed on, you know. Culture, tradition might change, but culture can be passed on. That's what I believe.
Yeah, culture can be passed on, and the thing is, I like what you say about instilling in them and over pampering, because I think we have a problem as African immigrants of trying to fit in.
Yes.
We're so focused on fitting in that that we forget our own we forget our own culture. Anyone else who has something to say about this?
This is Dr. Ramoni here again. I'm just going to
Yes.
add, I love the way the conversation is going, because Miss Sophia has addressed, you know, the other side of what we should be doing and not doing. You know, it's important for us to pass the history to our children. It's important for us to tell them exactly where we came from or what we were doing, our traditions, our cultures. That's very important. And so for me, I'm going to talk about why it's important to do that. Why it's important for us not to stop doing that. When you tell kids about their history, you are providing them with a place where they find identity. Who do they identify with? Are they Africans? Are they Americans? Are they Black Americans? What are they? You know, we're not providing them with that safe haven for them to know this is where we belong. And number two, through our history, we can model the negative and the positive things which happened before, and we're able to choose or to go the right path. You know, this is what our ancestors did. This is where mommy and daddy came from, and this is where you are. This is how we do things when we came from. This is how we resolve conflict, we resolve issues, we tackle marriages, and we tackle this and the other. Childbirth celebrations were done like this. We are providing a place, a lifelong history for them. They have a path to talk about. If somebody calls them out there and say, where are you from? Or what do you guys do? What do you practice? They have something to say. But if we don't provide that, we don't give them the pass, we don't teach them anything, really, we are letting them for failure. They may be passing everything professionally and in school, but in the life journey, we are failing our children.
Yeah, and Ms. Ogenga did comment on Facebook here that we are facing a big issue, which is an identity crisis. It's about identity crisis for both parents and youth, a huge problem, wanting to fit in. Ms. Tate, how did you manage, because your children grew up here? How did you manage to instill that? And of course, it's more than, and the funny thing is now that the Black people, the African Americans, are now more interested in our culture, about learning. You hear them even have African names. These headscarves and the turbans are back in. They're all for Ankara and stuff, and they're more Africanized in a way than us. What you got to say about that, Miss Tate?
So, just as a by the way, I think it's what kind of movie they did it for us. That's what my kids say. But,
oh yeah.
but you know, my children are actually Kenyan and African American. The father is African American. So I know that we have had to have many conversations about both cultures, because to me it was important for them to embrace their African American culture, which is quite rich actually, if you have the opportunity to really spend time in it. There's so much richness in that culture for you know, you could tell from the poem that was just recited earlier. So, you know, I wanted them to be sure that they embraced that side of themselves. And I also wanted them to be sure that they embraced my culture. So we grew up with Kenyan food. Their father enjoyed it very well as well. We grew up with Kenyan music. You know, I'm thankful that the father was a man that supported my culture as well. So in the process of doing that, you know, I think recently my son told me, he says, "Mommy, thank you so much for exposing us to the Kenyan culture and for exposing us to the Kenyan parties." Of course, you know, and we party a lot, and a lot of times our kids pick up some of our traditions and cultures from that. And I think it's quite healthy that we keep that up, you know, in a healthy way, of course. But I think that in order for us to avoid what Ms. Rose was just talking about, the identity crisis, we have to let our kids know what the ladies were talking about earlier. Who are you? Who are you, mommy? You know, I met you in America. I don't know. I didn't see you growing up. So introducing them to family members. My sister just came from Kenya recently, and when she talks about me, my kids laugh. So they get to know me from my sister's perspective. And then my parents lived with me also, you know, for quite some time. So when my parents are calling me with my Kenyan name, you know, they think it's kind of funny, but who is that? Why is grandpa calling you that? So, you know, just picking up those different experiences along the way really makes them the people, the valuable people that they are today. And I think that, you know, we can't be too hard on us as parents. We cannot be too hard on us as parents, because truth be told, we also struggle with identity crisis when we come to this country, because we're trying to figure out where we belong. I mean, you know, I was sharing with someone yesterday that my first experience of racism wasn't even from a different race. It was from my own race. So we struggle with fitting in. But where do you belong? Do you belong to the African American race, or do you belong to the Caucasian race? Where do you belong? So our struggles are real to experience, and it's important that we acknowledge those struggles and we remind ourselves of who we are. You know, remind ourselves of our values and our cultures and stick with it, but give our kids room to exist in their own space, because they're not like us. You know, they are American with Kenyan parents. They're American with Nigerian parents. And they can teach us a lot along the way if we allow them space to be who they are. But we must not forget to share with them our culture, because it's rich, it's who we are. We're kings and queens. And it's not just a word, it's the truth. You know, as African people, I'll say from my tribe especially, I'm sorry to say that, but we come from a tribe where there's so many leaders, and I remind them of those leaders in history so that they know that the DNA has leadership, the DNA has strength, their DNA is fearless, and that everywhere they go, they should walk knowing that they belong, that it's not a mistake for them to be where they are today.
And that's a very important that's a loaded she loaded us and packed us with info. Yes, it's very true. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Sibanda is back. Mrs. Sibanda, being a very good storyteller and being someone who Mrs. Sibanda never mixes her words. Mrs. Sibanda, tell us straight, how do we equip ourselves as Africans to make sure our children know our culture? I know I've sang with you, and I know that you always instill how good our heritage is. And I would like to hear her viewpoint on how to well equip our families. Mrs. Sibanda.
Read a book, Running Away from Your Shadow.
Mhm.
I can't remember the author of that book, but I read that book more than 3 times. And it was talking about these things. It's unfortunate that we are not, this conversation is not only starting here in America today. We've had that conversation even back home. You remember, I don't know, in other countries. In my country, maybe you grow up in a certain high density suburb, where your houses are semi-detached, and or you're coming from the rural areas. You come into the high density suburb where you are living in these 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom. You are sleeping, and maybe 7 of you or 4 of you are sleeping in one room and things like that. And then fortunately, maybe your parents make it and they buy in the middle, where maybe you are sharing 2 of you a bedroom. And then later on, you go to the low density suburbs where you are now having your own bedroom. And then these issues start. Now you want to disconnect from where you are coming from. I think this author, that's where he was coming from, to say running away from your shadow. You come here, and I'm talking from experience, that's exactly what happened to us with our children. And when we were here, now the town, the suburb was called Waterford. And my children, now they start speaking English. They are going to an English school, speaking only English. There's only English. They are coming from where we used to, learn. They would learn in our local language, and now they are learning only in English. And they have this accent that has changed because they are interacting with the white girls and the white boys, and all of a sudden they've forgotten where they're coming from. So now you start telling your children, we used to cook rice and put peanut butter, and you eat that, and you run to school. They have a bus that takes them to school. I'm talking about back home. So these conversations are not only starting now, they started well back before. Now, when we came here, things even get worse. So how do you deal with it? I think that's where your question is.
Yes, ma'am.
The problem is not my child. The problem is me. When I want, in my mind, I cut off exactly where I'm coming from, not knowing that where I'm coming from, that gave me a background. I am what I am today because of my history, because of where I am coming from. That's why otherwise you wouldn't be talking to Mrs. Panda today, asking you these questions, if there wasn't that rural grandmother who used to fry some peanuts and put them on that, a small wooden plate, and me sleeping by the fire. And if we tell, it all depends on how I tell my story. If I tell that story as a sad story and show suffering rather than embracing it as the beauty of Africa, the beauty of sitting around the fire and hearing those stories from my grandmother, if I tell that as a beautiful story, my children will get a beautiful story. But if I tell it as a sad story, that, oh my God, we were so poor. I'm telling you the truth, we were so poor. My first underwear, my sister gave it to me, was a second-hand underwear. But you know what? I had one that I was given by. And I embraced that. And I tell it in a story, a beautiful story. Our children will buy it. How are we telling our story? I'll end there.
Very good. I like what she has said. Most of us are afraid of, or the way we tell our children our background, they do not even want to go visit, because they're like, I don't think you, mommy, you suffered. I do not want that. So I think that's very important. The way we tell the story can change a lot of the way we interact with the children. And I believe she was speaking about when people move to a certain area, then they start to behave a certain way. Now, in America, they call it white flight. White flight is when white people move away from a black place because it's densely black populated, and they move. There's not as much black flight. But among African immigrants, there's a lot of black flight because we do move to the suburbs. We live in Dallas. For us, like, you'll see a lot of people move towards McKinney, towards Allen, towards where the good schools are, because you want a good school district and all that. So for African immigrants, I do think we do have some sort of black flight. And within that black flight, we then forget to to still embrace the African culture, I think is what I was hearing. So really, right now, as I continue piggybacking on what Mrs. Sibanda just said, have you faced anything when your children have come and told you that they've heard a racial slur? Of course, they've been called dark, navy, you're African and you're backward and you're living on trees. But have you heard, because they're Black now, and even before they're African, the kids have good accents. They're not really African accents. So they're basically termed African American. Have children come to you and told you, someone called me colored, or someone called me a nigger, or someone told me I'm a house Negro? You can be called a house Negro and sometimes if you're too white, if you're behaving too white, then you're called Uncle Tom. Have you seen these racial slurs? Have you experienced them yourself? Number one, have you experienced them yourself, or your family members, or your children? And how did you, and of course from the television, you hear them a lot from the television. How do you admonish your children from using them? And how do you explain when your children hear those words? And anyone can dive right in. And of course, I would like the ladies who have children who are teenagers, that music uses those words very loosely as well. So touch on that as well. They use the word nigger and all those racial slurs very loosely.
I'll just jump in and say something. Personally, I've never experienced it, I would say that. And my children have never come to talk to me about that. But what I'd say is, as parents, or as a mother of somebody who is Black, it's upon us to be able to, again, I go back to affirmation and education and self-awareness. We need to be able to educate our children, not what they call you is what you are, who are you, think about yourself. You know yourself, who you are, who you belong to, how you are created. That is why I handle racism issues. Some people handle them differently. But for me, somebody calling me Black, I am Black. I am Black. So what's a big deal about that? But then it just depends on how that calling will be able to react to it. How do you react to it? What do you tell your children when somebody calls them that? Again, what context? What were you guys talking about? Just telling the kids that, affirmation, we don't affirm our kids enough. Sometimes it could be a motivating factor. You are calling me Black because you've seen some Black person do something, or because we are known as either lazy, stupid, or whatever they call us, So that time as a parent, you need to affirm your kids, self-awareness, self-reflection. Let your child know they can call you anywhere, anything. But remember, you are a child of God. And when you are in this house, this is who you are. You are smart enough. You can do better than them. You achieve high and mighty all the time. And so to me, I don't think I should feel offended. Okay, as a human being, I will feel offended, but I'll take up the other lead of, okay, you think I'm Black and so I'm not able to do this. Let me show you how it's done. And that's how I brought my kids. You are supposed to be leaders, not followers. So whether you are Black, yellow, orange, or whatever they call you, you know yourself, have that confidence, go there and do it. You can do that. They should not tell you otherwise. So calling name that they've called you, move on from that. Let's move on, and don't associate yourself with such kind of names in future. That's what I tell them. You know them now, you know what they're gonna call you. Just be careful. Have your boundaries. You know what to talk about with people. Know what you do. That's what I'll say for now. And I just want to add what Miss Sibanda has just said. I'm sorry, I know we don't have time. We use our experience back home as to show our kids as a punishment. Let us not do that. So most of them don't want to associate with that because they think it's a punishment. That's all I can say for that.
Okay, Mrs. Sibanda, your quick thoughts on this? As any racial slurs, real quick?
It's not just a short testimony. Our time is up. My skin, color of my skin, I'm dark. Even back home, the light-skinned people would laugh at me and say you are dark, you know. And because of some people ended up using light, that lightening creams because they were called dark. You get your self-esteem, and because you have been called dark. It only took my father who told me that I was beautiful. Don't do anything to skin. You are beautiful. And I believed him. Up to now, I've never used anything. If it wasn't for my father, it was really getting into my mind. I thought all people who are beautiful are those who are light-skinned. You come back, you come here, you are told you are black. And if you have not ascertained your child that they are beautiful, every time you put it in them and they know it, they wear something, you tell them you're beautiful and everything, and they believe it and they walk tall. It doesn't matter what someone tells them outside there. So we need to empower our children, especially the girl child.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ibanda. Well, I will keep that in thought before we close here. Ms. Tate, your quick thought on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I've had a different experience from my panelists here. Yes, I have been called the N-word, and unfortunately, yes, I have. And I live in Tennessee, so maybe that could be.
Yeah, Tennessee is pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, so I remember a Walmart experience when I was really going through a difficult time. My mom had a brain tumor surgery, and I was gathering groceries to take my mom to do a get together at my house so we could do a fundraising for her medical expenses. And in that state of mind, I think I skipped a line by mistake, and a young Caucasian lady, approached me and was very, very upset that I skipped the line. And I wasn't thinking. I was in a zombie kind of mindset, and it didn't go very well. Obviously, I was with my son. So I say that I will not let my son see somebody call me the N-word and I don't do anything about it. So I approached the lady and I spoke to her in this tone. Now, I don't raise my voice when I'm upset. Maybe my voice quivers a little bit, but I made sure that I told her that in this century, nobody uses those terminologies to address the other person. And she got very upset and got loud, and I kind of made me a little uncomfortable. I was thinking I was going to be on TV the next day for whatever chaos was going on. So I collected myself and held my son's hand, and I told him, son, don't you ever let anybody talk to you like that. If somebody talks to you like that, you stand up and you speak for yourself and you say, no, you do not treat me like that. So yes, I have experienced it, and that is what I can do is we have to have a voice. We have to use our voices. Many of us who are in the corporate world, we've been given an opportunity to have those positions in those places, maybe being first minority in those places. I know, Ramoni, you can attest to that, and Wilda, can attest to that also. Many of us are like first generation Africans in those positions, and sometimes there's always a little bit of discomfort, I must admit, but we have to stand. We have to let our voices be heard. We have to speak for what we believe is right. Because if we're not authentic in those positions, then we don't make it easy for our daughter who's going to come behind us or our son who's going to come behind us. So I think authenticity with all the situation is also quite important.
Be authentic.
Yeah.
Authenticity, that is very important. Ms. Miruka, last thoughts on this.
You cannot afford to be apologetic of who you are. You can't afford to put yourself in a place that you are going to be sorry of who you are. So for me, I reassure everybody, like, stand for yourself, put your foot down when you need to, let it be known, let your demarcation be clear, your values. You cannot be pushed into using those words. I mean, we don't use those words, period. We don't pronounce those words. So whenever you come across them, like my colleague panelist there has already said, shut it down, keep moving, keep your head up, you know, and yeah, never be apologetic of who you are.
I love that. Never be apologetic of who you are. Never apologize for who you are. And I thank you very much. This was very enlightening. And of course, we are not even halfway done through this discussion. So we'll be back next week. And from what Mrs. Sibanda said, yes, there is racism, even Black on Black racism, racism within ourselves, within African countries, within ourselves. Then we have racism within being the darker skinned people to the lighter skinned people, even within our community, and reverse racism, because what happens is we may fall into the danger of becoming racist ourselves. So next week, we're going to touch on also the topics of how our personal biases may inflict or instill certain things in us and how we view racism and raising a child as a village. That's an important question we're going to also tackle next week, and how we as African immigrants and Blacks as well living abroad can more or less have a proper way forward, how we raise our children to be better off and also curb racism as a whole. We'll see you next week. Thank you very much. And keep your questions coming, and we'll address the questions as well next week. I will now hand it over to Ms. Wilder, the host of Difficult Conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bianca. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As you have seen, there's no question talking about race can be sensitive and, yes, even a bit messy. And choosing whether or not to talk to your kids about race is an option parents, specifically of color, don't have. And some children may or will inevitably learn about it by confronting racism. If we don't talk to our children, they will fill in the gaps themselves. And their data points may not always be coming from the most reliable sources, as we have had our panelists talk about today. So join us next week as we continue this topic of what shall I tell my children in regards to race and social justice. Until next week, it's bye from us.